know about you, but I had an interesting experience. Maybe you'll relate to this. I got to go to Hawaii many years ago. I got to speak at a camp, and we had a couple days. They flew us out there, so we didn't have any money at the time, but it was fun. We got to go to Hawaii, which was pretty cool. We were on Maui, and we went to this. We were like walking through Lahaina, one of the little cities there, and we came across this gallery, an art gallery. I'm not a big art guy. I mean, I had art appreciation in college and everything, but I've never been a collector, like really moved by art. But I saw this painting, and I'll describe it to you, and you're gonna say whatever. But it was just it was a vase with these forget-me-not flowers, and they're like purple lavender color. And it was an oil painting, kind of in the more of a classical style. It was dark in the back, and the way the light hit the flowers, I don't know what happened. But I saw it, and it was like, I love this. I love this. You know, how much is it? And it was like some ridiculous amount of money, especially for us back then. And I was like really moved by this picture. It never happened in my whole life. Has it ever happened to anybody with art? It never, and I was just like, I need this. I couldn't get enough of it. I drove Gina crazy. We went 3 times back to this gallery just so I could look at this. I'm thinking, how could I afford this? You know, all this stuff. And there was something, like literally emotionally responded to the beauty of that painting. Maybe you've had an experience like that, being out, you know, at Creation, and you're the most beautiful sunset you've ever been, and there's something so beautiful that it just stirs you. Or maybe it's been a movie that was so powerful, you didn't want to get up and move because whatever you encountered was so, and it's hard to put into words, isn't it? There's a song that I love, it's a piano song by Debussy, that's his name, Claude, I pronounced it, that loves beauty. We're drawn to it, aren't we? And you can't always explain what's going on. It's almost more than words. There's something about beauty and love that a lot of people today who tell us that, you know, I mean, the question is that really beauty and love? Are those things just, you know, some chemical reaction that we evolved to enjoy, to somehow help our ancestors survive? Because that's what some people try to tell us. That there's just, you know, when you think of some great love or some great beauty, something you're drawn to, that somehow that's just a chemical reaction in your brain. And you wonder, is that really true, or is there something more? You know, because I believe that those things, that deep beauty that we're drawn to, that idea there's a greater joy out there, there's something we touch, and it's a hint of God's fingerprint in our life. You know, Timothy Keller, I love a lot of things he writes, and I've read a lot of his books, and he says something about that. He says, you know, what is it about, you know, fish? They're not supposed to be like uncomfortable in water, right? That's kind of a weird way of saying it. But the idea is fish are totally comfortable and at peace and at ease in water. But he said, why is it as a human that I'm so uneasy or out of place in a sense with the way the world is? I have a sense that it's supposed to be better. And see, this is all a hint about something that God has made us for and that we desire greatly. And we've been going through this series called I Doubt It. And we've been looking at these questions like things I just mentioned, but really deep questions. The first week we went over, you know, origin. You know, why? I mean, how did I get here? How did humanity get here? And why? And do we have a purpose? And if you weren't here, I hope you go listen to that message. The second week, we went over this idea of truth. You know, is there a truth? Can we know truth? And is the Bible a reliable source of truth? See, the answers to these kind of questions are like so important because they're like foundations that you can dig, and from those foundations, you can build a strong life. And if you have a confident answer to those questions, doubt's just part of human experience. But doubt doesn't have to be something, because I think that's kind of what our culture is, you know, do whatever makes you happy. That's kind of become the mantra of our culture. And it's hard to tell someone not to do something if it's gonna make them happy. And so the question is, where do you find happiness? And is it possible to find happiness? And interestingly enough, if you talk to parents sometimes, even if their kids are doing something maybe they weren't excited about, you know, what they'll usually just say is, I just want them to be happy, you know? I just want them to be happy. You see, the pursuit of happiness has become the focus in our lives, isn't it? We don't even think about it. The pursuit of happiness has become the focus of life. So much so, we don't even question whether it should be the focus. Of course. What's the goal of life? Be happy. And so we don't even question whether that's the right pursuit, because it's such a big part of our culture. And one of the things we need to ask ourselves is it working? Is making the pursuit of happiness working for individuals and as a culture? Interesting things happening in the world. The places where you have economic development, where people, they don't have to work so many hours. They have enough to eat and shelter, and they get health care. And as the standard of living goes up, the scores of life satisfaction go up as well. But there's a weird paradox connected to this, especially the more Western and more industrialized a nation gets, the more that standard of living goes up, and there's a corresponding rise in the level of unhappiness. Something's wrong. We're getting more leisure, better healthcare, more stuff, more money, more free time, more recreation, which is supposed to make us happy. And yet, all the levels measuring unhappiness, anxiety, depression, mental illness, all these things that people are reporting are on the rise in these places. And so, there's a problem. Happiness seems to be so elusive. Pete Nicholas, in his book, A Place for God, he says that happiness is shy, or it's a shy virtue. Because it seems like the more people chase it and the more they focus on it, the less they actually get it. It's very shy. And I heard someone say something years ago, and I never forgot it. They said this, and this is true in my life. I've experienced this. The more self-absorbed I am, the more depressed I become. Have you experienced that? And it's interesting, at the very time everyone's telling us to focus on yourself and you be you and look to yourself and look within your heart, and that seems to go against that saying. In fact, Jesus had something powerful to say about this too that totally goes counterculture to what we're told, right? We're told do whatever it takes, whatever makes you happy. And he was saying this, he was talking to them, he was saying this to them in verse 23 of Luke 9. If anyone wishes to come after me, now wait a minute, just stop for a second. If anyone wishes to come after Jesus, now keep in mind, everybody wanted to be with Jesus. Everyone wanted to be close to him. Everyone wanted to be like him. Why? Because here is this guy who's got so much peace. He's got such a strong connection to God. There's something so different about him. There's something attractive about him. I want to be like him. What does he have? That is the thing I want. And so all these people are clinging around. They want to be here. They want to be like him. And they want to follow him. In those days, if you wanted to be like someone, like a rabbi, when they called him teacher, you'd want to hang out with him and he would teach. So it says, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Deny himself. That's exactly opposite of what our culture is so often telling us to do. And yet that's what Jesus said to do. And he said this, next verse, he says, whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. And so obviously at one point we understand if you literally give up your life for Christ, because people were martyred later, right? That you would find your life in eternal with God. But I also believe this also has to do with just this direction of our life, that if we strain and make happiness and grabbing and seeking to make our life the best it can be our way and making ourselves the focus, we'll miss the whole thing. We'll lose what we're looking for. But on the other hand, if we will lose our life for Jesus' sake, what does that mean? Live for Jesus. Put him first in your life. Live life the way he says, and die to yourself and deny yourself and give yourself to Jesus and let him do a work in your life. Then you will find what you were created for, and that life that you desire, you'll actually get it. Does that make sense? And then he says this, for what does a man profit from their happiness? And so this idea, somehow pursuing happiness is required removing all constraints. It basically means that an individual will be more likely to experience happiness if they can push off all the constraints in their life. And so we have people looking at their sexual identity and say, this sexual identity is holding me back from what I really want to be happy. And they're pushing beyond that restriction. Or people are saying, I don't want to be married anymore because if I could not be married to you, I could be happy. And this goes on in all kinds of areas of our life. Isn't this true? And when I was in high school, you hear phrases like, you be you do you, be true to yourself, follow your heart, speak your truth. But this idea of be true to yourself, I remember, have you heard this? This is a very common thing in our culture. I'm not making this up. This is something we all know. When I was in high school, just a few short years ago, that hurts, but 12th grade English, and Mr. Langston, we studied Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet. And I kind of liked it. It was really interesting. But there was a quote in there that you guys have probably heard before, to thine own self be true. To thine own self be true, which is really be true to yourself, right? And we just have accepted that. But you know what's interesting? And my teacher, he like preached at us all the time. And there's some good truth in that. In fact, all effective lies have an element of truth in there, isn't there? And so there's some truth that's important to know yourself. But to focus on yourself is not necessarily a good thing. And the thing we forget about, who said that in Hamlet? Woody Allen was a very popular character. I'm just kidding. But Woody Allen is a really popular character in Hollywood for a long time. And an amazing thing happened. He was credited with a quote, "The heart wants what the heart wants." Have you heard that before? I mean, it's become kind of a big deal. The heart wants what the heart wants. But it's really interesting. I was reading that book that I've recommended to you guys, Live No Lies by Mark Homer, and he kind of unpacked what actually happened that quote came out. What actually happened is that Woody Allen married this woman, and then he ended up, after time, falling in love with her daughter, his stepdaughter, and he ended up sleeping with her. And it was a big hubbub in Hollywood. A lot of people were kind of like, most people were like, hey, whatever makes you happy, a lot of people. But some people were like, wait a minute, that's not okay. And so this interviewer was asking him, trying to draw out any kind of like, hey, are you sorry? Are you gonna admit you made a mistake? And he just wouldn't. And finally, Woody Allen said, when pressed by the interviewer, the heart wants what the heart wants. And so it's become this idea that we push through all boundaries so we can be happy. And of course, last week we explored that idea that as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, isn't really a very good way to decide whether we should do or not do something. But see, there's something in us that Mark Homer talks about, the slavery of freedom, this misunderstanding of what real freedom is. And so he's like, look, I think we understand this, right? We understand when people want to be free to drink and do drugs, but we understand that often leads to addiction and control and restrictions. You think you're free, but it becomes something, unforgiveness and bitterness. You think you're free and you're angry and you're using that anger and unforgiveness to kind of energize you and you want to get back to that person, but pretty soon you become enslaved. You're not free anymore. That's running your life. Or maybe it's greed. You want money, you want things because you think that'll fulfill you. And so first you're going to use this money to get what you want, but pretty soon you realize it's greed that is constraining you. I remember amazing talk with somebody, a friend of mine, and I won't use his name, but he doesn't go to this church. But I was having a conversation with him, and he told me something really interesting. He told me he had a brother-in-law who was in prison. And he had an amazing, interesting conversation with his brother-in-law. And he was trying to tell his brother-in-law, look, man, you need Jesus. You need to follow Jesus, give your life to Jesus. He was trying to encourage him to do that. And his brother-in-law at one point just stopped him and said, hey, I mean, you're a Christian. Don't you feel like you've missed out? Don't you feel like you're missing out? Now, the irony of this was not missed by my friend. Here he is talking to a guy who's in prison, the most restrictive, less free place you can possibly be physically, right? They tell you when to eat, when you can go outside, when to go to sleep. You're stuck in a cell. Here he is telling my friend as a Christian who's married, happily married and is doing really well in his life, don't you think you've missed out? Because you see what ends up happening is we become a slave to something in our life. And we don't understand this idea. So this idea of just pushing all restrictions off to be free is only half truth. It's only half true. For instance, this idea, philosophers call it two things. They call it freedom from, which is negative liberty, and freedom to, which is positive liberty. Don't worry, there's not gonna be a test on that. Let me just make that real to you. We all live like this every day, right? Like if you wanna be an amazing athlete, I wanna be free to become an outstanding athlete, to make that team, get that contract, to stand on that platform, to have that gold medal put on. If you wanna be free to do that, you have to restrict yourself. You can't eat whatever you want whenever you feel like it, right? because you want to be free to be the best athlete you can be. You know that you can't just stay up all night and party and do drugs. You can't do those things. And you have to push yourself and exercise, right? Because you want to be free to be a great athlete. And this is how we live our life. We understand that. So the idea that freedom only comes from having no constraints is absolutely not true. There's some truth to it, isn't there? I mean, racism is a great example. I mean, getting rid of racism is really freeing. That restriction, getting that out, being free from that is really a great thing. Because now, say, if I'm a person that people are being racist against, maybe it would hold me back from getting a job, or it would hold me back from getting a loan or something, or being able to move in a certain neighborhood. But getting rid of that, now I'm free. Now, that's a really positive part of freedom. So there is a truth to this idea that freedom is getting rid of certain things, getting rid of restrictions. But it is so important for you to understand that is only half true. The other truth is there's things I need in my life. I need to do some things that I maybe not always want to do, and I need to hold back from some things that I really do want to do so I can be the person I want to be. For instance, I want to have and enjoy a happy marriage. And by God's grace and being married to Mary Poppins, I do. She's practically perfect in every way. But here's the thing. I have to restrict myself from being romantic with only one woman, right? If I want a happy marriage and enjoy, a good marriage is so awesome. But if I want that, I have to restrict my romance to just one woman. I have to restrict myself. Are you with me? It's just an important thing we have to understand. And I love Dave Ramsey says that. He says, if you live like no one else, then you can live like no one else. What he means is getting your finances in order, getting a budget, restricting yourself so that later on you can really do great things and have freedom, but also peace in your finances. I mean, Christianity is often criticized because it's seen to be putting all these moral restrictions, overly restrictive, right? Isn't that how people think, like, I want to be happy, but Christianity is like, really restricts my happiness. See, if it feels good, we're told to do it. Imagine if I was in a 4-story building and I was gonna climb out the window and you were there with me and I was intending to jump out the window. I hope that you would say, John, stop, what are you doing? If you jump out the window, the law of gravity is gonna bring you down to the ground and you're gonna crash and you're gonna break a lot of bones and you might die and it's gonna hurt really bad. Imagine I said back to you, hey, I don't believe in gravity. I don't live by those rules. Don't constrain me. I wanna be free to fly. Imagine how silly that is. And yet, just like there's physical laws, there are spiritual and moral laws that work the same way. And that if we disregard, because that's just the way it is. And saying I don't believe in it or saying don't constrain me doesn't change it. What happens in a culture or a society when there's no laws? What do we call that? War. Like, why are you to be free in the first place? See, the real issue, and this might seem odd as I bring it up, but I think it'll make sense. The real issue is worship. What? No, free to worship. The key issue in this whole idea of how can I be happy is about worship. And I want to take you to this story, and you can go ahead and turn your Bibles to John chapter 4. And we're going to look at this amazing account when Jesus encountered a woman, a Samaritan woman. And for time, I'm just going to have to read through this. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, give me a drink. He's engaging her right where she is. Give me a drink, he says to her. And often it was with most cultures, even today, it's the woman's job to get the water and bring it back for the family, for whatever the family needs water. And so she's doing that responsibility. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. They were going to Chipotle probably. The Samaritan women said to him, wait, they have pork at Chipotle. Yeah, they can still go to Chipotle. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. And you can understand that the Samaritans looked down on, the Jews looked down on the Samaritans. And they would often go way up, they would travel miles around so they wouldn't have to even talk to, encounter them. That's how low they looked down on these people. And Jesus answered, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would he would have given you living water. He's like, do you have any idea who's standing before you? And the woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw with water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get the living water? Where do you get the living water? How can I be happy? Where do you get the living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. And Jesus said, and this is so important, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. He's not talking about water, is he? She's starting to clue in here. He's not talking about water. But isn't that true in our life? We grasp at things to make us happy, but we never have enough. Do you have enough money? Do you have enough likes? Are you a big enough influencer? Do you have enough experiences? I mean, if you make happiness your goal, if you're chasing happiness, you'll never have enough. You'll always want something else or something more. Isn't that true? Haven't you experienced that? And look what Jesus says. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him. I love that word, become in him. It will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. It'll become a spring welling up. And it'll satisfy you like no other pursuit, no other water can, no other chasing happiness. And the woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. I mean, she's kind of not sure what he's talking about, but she's starting to clue in, isn't she? And so we all want that. We want that deep love. We want that deep beauty, that deeper joy that we instinctively, as human beings, instinctively is the wrong word, but we have within us an understanding, a longing, a craving for it. And she does too. And she said, can you fulfill that longing within me? And Jesus said, go call your husband and come here. What? See, Jesus knew he had to deal with something first. There's a huge problem that's keeping this woman from that living water. There's a huge issue in humanity that keeps us from having that well of water that becomes a living spring in us into eternal life. The Bible calls it sin. It's the stuff, we don't like talking about it. She didn't want to talk about it either, you'll see. It's the stuff in our life that separates us from God. And he's like, before I can give you the living water, before you can have that experience of having that deep longing satisfied, to understand what you were created for, we first got to deal with this thing. Go get your husband. He's trying to show her something. And the woman answered and said, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, you are right in saying, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands. Think about that for a second. And the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. Think about that just for a second. She made a man in her life the object that could make her happy. And I told you earlier that this is really about worship, and I want you to think about something. All of us are gonna worship something, because worship is just ascribing ultimate value to something. It's saying, this is the ultimate worth, this is the ultimate thing. And so this is the thing I'm gonna pursue, I'm gonna chase with my life to make me happy. And you can worship money, you can worship prestige, you can worship family, you can worship your image, you can worship feeling good, you can worship sex, you can, whatever you want. But you're ascribing value and assigning that thing to be the ultimate value in your life. Everyone does this. And look what happened to her. She thought, if I could just get the right man. 5 divorces. What is it? She's pushed through all. She knew what you're not supposed to divorce. Even back then, come on, back then it was worse. She knew. But she pushed through those barriers because she wanted whatever it takes. And now she's living with a guy she's not married to. That's what happens when we make something else the object of our worship, as if it's gonna make us happy, it slowly puts us in slavery. And why do you think she's there when no one else was? Maybe you're not a Christian, or maybe you are. What are you pursuing as the ultimate thing in your life? That you're tempted to push off all the constraints to follow your heart. And don't get me wrong, there's times that God wants us to follow our heart. But she pursued happiness in men. What are you pursuing? What are you worshiping? And the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive you are a prophet." Now she's cluing in. And then she says, "Our fathers worshiped on this mountain." I love this, she's changing the subject. See, as I'm speaking to you about this, the Holy Spirit's speaking to you, and you're trying, some of you watching right now, listening, you're trying to change the subject. She does it here. She's like, "Well, our fathers worshiped on this mountain, but you say that Jerusalem is a place where people ought to worship." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming and is now here. It's here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him." God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. He's saying something radical to her. He's saying, look, it's not about where you worship. It's about what you worship. And the woman said to him, "I know the Messiah is coming. He who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us everything. He will tell us all things." And then Jesus makes this crazy statement to her, and she's suspecting already, I imagine. Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." And just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking. The woman left her water jar. Listen, that water jar, she left it. Come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? And here's what I want to challenge you with this morning. We're almost done. It's not about worshiping the wrong place, but it's worshiping the wrong thing. I want to ask you, are you worshiping the wrong thing? Is pursuing happiness as the object of your life, is it really coming through for you? Is it working? Or is there some deeper joy, some deeper beauty that you're really longing for? When I was, I received Christ and that idea of a living water, I remember feeling the God Spirit come into my life, and this joy, overwhelming joy come into my life. I like the way it said becoming, because I've felt that more and more as I have given my life to Jesus, and I know I should be more of a Christian and better than I am. I've been a Christian a long time. I should be way closer to God than I am, but I am trying. And by God's grace, more and more as I have entrusted and followed Jesus and allowed him to say, "John, do these things or don't do things," every time I do that, I feel I'm getting closer and closer, and I'm experiencing more and more of that joy of living water in my life. But I want to tell you, years ago when I was a young man, I was in charge of a youth ministry, and I remember thinking, if I could just be like these other youth pastors, these big, large ministries, and man, I would be so satisfied. I would be so happy. And so part of me, I know I was following the Lord and I love the Lord, but part of me was chasing after people's image of me and being successful. I want people to like me. I want to be one of those great speakers that everyone wants to hear. I want to be a person who's got this great influence. I want to be a person of great impact and really be, something special, that I would be happy. Well, guess what? I got to build and lead the largest, I think it was the largest youth ministry in San Diego for years. Guess what? I still thirsted. That could not produce in me what I wanted it to do. What is it for you? I mean, you could still be a Christian. I was still a Christian. I love God, but I had this illusion that I could get these things and it would fill me. And here's why I'm saying all this to you now. You were born. You were created, rather, to know and enjoy and worship God. It's not about happiness. It's about that joy that God wants to give you. Would you bow your heads for just a second? I want to say this to you. I want to say this to you. The joy your soul desires is God himself. The joy your soul desires is God himself. I wanted somehow to be connected to greatness. I wanted somehow to be great. But you know what I've learned true greatness is? Is letting God use you. I've learned I'm not the hero. I'm not the one who's great. I'm like a cover band. I sing a beautiful, glorious song, but it's not mine. The words aren't mine. The melody's not mine. And true greatness is to have that song sung through your life to touch other people. The thing you're longing for is to know, to worship, to enjoy God, to serve him. In just a moment, we're going to sing a song, and it's going to say, behold him, behold him, because what your soul longs for is the true greatness, the glory of God. And one of the most amazing and glorious things is how God restored humanity, redeemed us, bought us back through Christ. Your soul was created for that incredible sacrificial love.